Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again today. You're watching In Deep on the Delta, and yes, I am Steve Cooper, the same Steve Cooper that said he would never throw an A-rig, same Steve Cooper said he would never pick up a punch rod, and the same Steve Cooper that said he'd never throw a Ned rig. Well, guess what? Today I'm here to talk about Ned rig fishing. There were so many people that have told me within the last year, you got to throw a Ned rig out on the Delta. They're catching fish. I said, I'm not throwing a Ned rig on the Delta. Well, I had enough people tell me they were catching fish, and I got desperate enough that I went out and I started throwing a Ned rig. And guess what? You guys were right. Fish on the Delta respond to Ned rigs, and they are becoming a valuable asset here on the Delta. So today I'm going to do a video on Ned rig fishing, but it's not your standard Ned rig fishing. There's a few things that I really don't like about the standard Ned rigs. We're going to go into that, but today we're talking about Delta style Ned rig fishing. So let's get into it right now. Okay, I'm here and I'm on the bandwagon, and we're going to talk about Z-Man products and Ned rig fishing. And I like to start off with the basics here. First of all, the Z-Man products, all of their worms are made out of a stuff that they call Elaztech. And this stuff, all of you guys know about Elaztech. It's real stretchy, it's very durable, and it floats. And that is the key to Ned rig fishing, in my opinion. But I want to talk a little bit about a couple of things for you guys that may have never thrown Elaztech plastic. All of your standard worms, they're what they call PVC plastic. Ned worms are Elaztech plastic. They do not match up real well. Do not put these in your box together. They'll melt. I have right here, you can see where this one was melted, and that was because it was probably like this on a worm in my boat. You want to keep these not only away from other PVC worms, but any plastic PVC box like you have here. Don't get cute and think you're going to stick them all in there and make them look really nice. They'll melt the plastic on your box, the Plano boxes, and they'll create a big mess. So what you have to do is keep these in their own bag. Store them in their own bag and try to keep them out of the heat. They don't do real well with heat either. So a couple of things that you must know before you start using the Elaztech products. The Z-Man bags, they're made for Z-Man products, and one of the things that they have that I think the other soft storage bags don't have is insulation. And as you know, Z-Man sells a lot of stuff and they're from Florida, so they fish in really hot weather. And again, they recommend not leaving these out on your deck in 105-degree heat in the sun all day. They'll stick together. Sometimes they'll melt if it's hot enough. Now out here in California we probably don't have that problem, but they make this nice little box and it is insulated. But I want to talk about the box real quick because I think it's a good product, not necessarily for Z-Man stuff, but I keep all my other worms in here, and I really like this box. But for you guys that have had the soft-sided boxes, the one problem that most of us have is once you pack them full of worms, they just, they're too heavy for the to be very durable and hold their shape. So one of the things that I've done was I've made this little, just out of any cheap 1/8-inch wood, I've made this little box that I have put in here so that it kind of bolsters the not the durability of the bag, but it keeps it in its shape. So I got to get that down. So once I fill this up, I can really pack worms in here. This thing could be 20 pounds by the time I get it filled up. So what that box does, it keeps this thing from turning into like a plastic bag. So when you get it all buttoned up, it holds its shape nicely. And it also is nice when you're storing it in lockers, that it's not an oddball shape. A lot of times we're throwing boxes and PVC boxes and Plano boxes and different tackle storage devices in the drawers of our boat. It's nice to have square stuff because everything kind of fits in there. So anyhow, just a little hit for the Z-Man box. If you get one, you might want to make something like I did, just to keep, so the box will keep its shape. Okay, back to the Z-Man products. First of all, this is the standard Z-Man TRD worm with the Z-Man head that everyone throws. It is a great rig, but there's several things that I don't like about this rig. Number one, the heads are fine for finesse fishing if you're up in the lakes, but the hooks are just too light wire for the Delta. So I don't like using the Z-Man heads. The other thing is the standard finesse TRD worm, which is about 2 inches long, is just too small out here on the Delta. I know it will catch fish, but I don't see a lot of fish over 5 pounds grabbing this all the time. And I know the minute I say that, somebody's gonna send me in a picture of a 10-pound fish that they caught on this bait. That can happen, but more than likely this is attracting a lot of smaller fish. So two of the things that I'm going to be addressing today are different heads and different products from Z-Man that are made out of this Elaztech. And also the third thing that I will address is having a open hook without any weed guard on it, which in the Delta, when this thing is sitting down in the weeds, has real problems. So heavier hook, bigger bait, and something that's weedless are things that we have to address. What I like to do is say, I think these are productive because of the way that they sit in the water. With this bait floating and this mushroom style head, when it goes down, it generally sits on the head. So I'll just kind of hold it up there so that it's on the bottom like this, and you can just pop it a little bit and just get that, you know, bounce it along the bottom. You guys have all seen the Ned Rig, how it works. Here is one of the key problems that I have found with the heads that I'm using. If you use a heavy wire hook, and I am using two styles of hooks, an inline worm hook and an extra wide gap worm hook, and you can see the difference in these two hooks. This is a medium heavy, this is a light gauge hook. It really makes a difference on the gauge of the wire in the hook that you use to keep these things floating. If you use too heavy of a hook, it's going to drop that TRD worm down like this, and you don't get the same bouncing along. So that's one of the things that I've been experimenting with a lot, along with the heads that I use to replace the Z-Man heads. The first thing I'd like to do is introduce you guys to some of the Z-Man products that I've been using to basically replace the finesse TRD worm, this small little worm. And to replace this 2-inch finesse TRD, the first thing I would recommend is the big TRD, which is about 3 inches long, 3.5 inches long. I don't know what it is. You can see the difference in size. So this is addressing one issue. It's a little bigger bait. And again, the difference between these two, I don't know that it's going to track any bigger fish, but this is the standard that I have been using for my Ned rigging on the Delta. They also make a hula, what is it called? A hula stick, and it is a 3-inch bait. The only difference that this has, it has some little tentacles on the end that, you know, hold up here, and obviously when this is poking up here, they move around in the water, and you know, it could be a fish attractant. I haven't used these a lot, but if you guys are locked into a smaller bait, I would suggest moving from the smaller bait to something like the hula grub and fishing this, or what is it, hula stick, and fishing this as a real finesse bait. And again, if you're going to use this, you can go with the Z-Man head. Now we're going to get into some interesting stuff. One thing that they make is the mag fatty, and that's this worm here. And this is one that I'm really experimenting with a whole lot. I think it's about a 6-inch worm. It's a nice sized worm, and remember, if you don't want this whole worm, all of us have scissors. This can be cut down to the proper length. And we're going to talk about what the proper length is, because the proper length is going to really, what the heck do we have out here? Mud hens. The proper length is going to correspond with what hook and what rig you're using. You may not, if you're using a heavier wire hook, you may need this whole worm to be buoyant enough to pull that hook up so it floats right. if it's laying down because the hook's too heavy and it's pulling it down, it's not going to give you that Ned rig effect where the worm is here and we're able to twitch it in place. So you're starting to see what I'm getting at, hopefully, when we get into the jig heads and stuff, how the worms are going to correspond with the size of the hook and the actual rig you're using in order to keep everything up and down instead of falling. So anyhow, this is the Mag Fatty. They also make the Zinker, which is a 5-inch Cinco, and I have been using this one a lot also, and I'll show you how I'm using that one here in just a minute. And last but not least, they've got the giant TRD. Now we're getting into delta size baits. These guys here are delta size baits that will attract delta size fish, and we're going to talk about how we rig these and some of the things that I've been doing. And remember, the TRD, or the giant TRD, can be cut down with scissors. And think about this. Here is the standard finesse TRD worm. Let's just say we want to upsize this. We can cut this worm down here, and instead of using this, we have this guy, or cut it down by my fingers, and we have a more substantial bait. So hopefully you see what I'm getting at. So this is the lineup of TRD worms that Z-Man makes. Here's another thing from Z-Man. I've looked at some of their tutorials, and they suggest for more buoyancy out of this to pull them and get them stretched out, and they will actually become a little more buoyant. So take that into consideration. The other thing that they say is to rough them up. And I'm going to give you, this is a tip that's not necessarily that I use for Z-Man. I use this all the time for my Cincos. But I've got a ice cream stick and I've got some Velcro that it's just stuck on there. So this is what I use to rough up the baits. And I'll rough this up real quick, and you can just rough it up. And usually what you'll see on this is it takes the shine off, but it also I don't know what it does to the Elaztech, but according to Z-Man, when it's roughed up, it will help it become more buoyant. Now, if you're using the Yamamoto Cincos, try some Velcro on an ice cream stick. And again, just I'm gonna rough this one up, and I'll show you what it looks like. Once you rough them up, it takes the shine off, and it also really brings out the salt in them. And I have a lot better luck when I'm roughing these things up. And so I'll take them out of the bag, I'll rough them up, and then I will really hit them with some Procure or something, you know, some kind of scent. Another thing I'd like to talk about is using scent with the Elaztech worms. They're a slow-moving bait. I strongly suggest you use scent on these things. As far as I can tell, they haven't destroyed them. There's nothing in the Elaztech that doesn't go well with scent. I like this garlic crawfish out here on the Delta. So any of these rigs that I'm talking about for the Elaztech Ned rig type fishing, scent them heavily, because the fish are going to come up and inspect them and maybe take a minute or two before they grab this. So if it has a little scent on it, it can't hurt. And the other, let's talk about why these are so effective and why everyone is using them. Number one, they're great in cold water. They're a year-round bait. They are good on heavily pressured water, like we have here on the Delta. And they are good on fish that aren't super active. And a lot of times here on the Delta, at certain tides, slack tides, dead tides, you know, sometimes throughout the whole tide, the fish just don't get active. So when these fish aren't active, I can take the chance of even going down to a smaller bait, hoping to catch some 1 to 3 pound fish when I'm not catching them with anything else. So these baits, the way they were designed, they really are kind of, you know, designed for places like the Delta. So keep that in mind. Now, let's get into the first technique that I'm using that some of you guys might be using, some of you guys may have not thought about. And this happens to do with either the zinker or the big TRD. This is what I'm using for this particular technique. And again, they make great colors, the peanut butter and jelly, the purple, the California craw, you know, they're all good colors. So what we're going to do here is simply use a Delta style drop shot or a Bubba shot. It's just the standard drop shot rig, and I'll take these, and just like anything else, I like to rig them wacky. And the advantage of this guy here is when your weight's on the bottom, because these worms float, as you give them slack, they won't go down to the bottom. They'll stay on top, and they have a really nice action. And you could use, like I say, either the stick bait, the zinker, or this large TRD, and that's one of the ways I'm fishing that. And they really have good action on a drop shot. Not a big departure from things, but if you haven't thought about that, think about drop shotting a couple of those different TRD worms. Now we're going to get into the situation of what we're doing on the bigger worms and how we're fishing them on the bottom. One of my most effective rigs is using this style of a head. Anything that sits like this and will sit on the bottom and kind of help that worm ride straight up and down. And what we're doing here on these guys is simply taking either the big TRD, the hula grub, you can put any of the bigger worms on it, but you're going to just put this on. One way to do it is just simply have an exposed hook if you can get away with it, and hook it just like any other worm. And this really helps to keep it straight up and move it along the bottom. It also helps because you can get this style of head with a heavy hook for bigger fish. So think about the head and the hook. Now if you have a head and you drop it down, you look at it and this thing falls down like this, it's not doing what we really want it to do. Maybe the end of the tail will come up, but it won't pull the bait up like this. Here's where the let's see, where's that thing? Here's where I want to make sure I call it by the right name. The mag fatty comes into play. Now, whether you're using a heavy Z-Man head or this style of head, you may not need this whole worm. When you take the worm and you set this mag fatty up, because it's got so much more bulk, I guarantee you, when this sets down like this, it's going to pull that head into place and it's going to sit just like this. And when you start, you know, jigging it around, this thing has great action. If you're having problems with an exposed hook, you can always do standard things like text pose it, which means coming in at an angle, putting your bait on, and text posing it into the hook like this so that it's weedless. That's always an option. The other thing that you can do is if you're really killing it on smaller worms, you can simply take this big mag fatty, cut it down. You can use this for a finesse TRD when you go up to Maloney's or somewhere, and now you've cut down maybe a 6.5 inch worm to a 4 or 5 inch worm, whatever you're using, whatever you need to float this bait up like this. So think about that with the head that you're using, how it's floating. Now, my favorite way to fish these in the Delta, and what I'm finding I'm getting bigger fish, is I am using a swinging jig head. And I really like, this one is one that's attached. You can't change the hook on it. I really like the swinging heads that, well, here's one here that you can pull the hook off. I can change hooks on this, and you see I have a much more of a light wire hook, an inline worm hook. Now I can change this hook out to a heavier hook if I want to put on an extra wide gap hook, or just get a hook that's a much stouter hook. I can change the hook out, because remember, on this here, with this inline sinker, inline worm hook, you can take this and rig it just like you'd be rigging a T-worm or a T-rig setup. Pull it through, get it up there on the keeper so it's running straight, and to expose it so that you have nothing for that hook to catch. It's protected, it's weedless, and obviously you're going to tie your running line onto here, and you're going to just bounce this along the bottom. You can be a little more active with this as you cast it out. Pop, 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 pop. Let it stop, or you can just throw it like you would a regular Ned rig. Throw it out there, let it go to the bottom, and this gives this bait a little more opportunity to swing around. And again, you cut your bigger worms down to the size of worm that the fish are taking, or the size of worm that you need to float the worm up. And I guarantee you this will hold just like this. Now, this worm will hold this rig up with this hook. It's a fine wire hook. If I was to change to a heavier hook, I would have to probably use the whole worm, because the whole worm has a lot more buoyancy and it will lift this rig up. So that is a key to throwing this ball head jig. The other thing that I really like is, this is another one of these flat type jigs that I showed you. First off, it's like this guy here. I put a skirt on. Now I tie my skirts on them, and you can see I've got a skirt on this one. And boy, I'm telling you guys, when you, I'll just use a, what is this one? A big TRD. Exposed hook. Again, you can hook them however you want, but this is run with an exposed hook. This guy right here is a really nice bait. It's big enough to pull a bigger fish, and with this living rubber on it, man, when this gets in the water, just this, this is moving all the time, even if you're not moving the bait. And with this floating up, it's got just this little bit of going on it, and a little pop every now and then. This has been, we'll put it this way, between the drop shot style, this guy here, and running the ball head, those are my the three ways that I've caught most of my fish out here. The last thing that I'm going to get into is throwing either whatever you want to call it, a Tokyo rig, a Jinka rig, shoot, they call them everything that you can think of out here. I think they call this one a Jinka rig, but they're all the same thing. I have caught fish on these, and they're for light punching or tule dipping. They have a lot of weight on here, and if you can use pretty much any size worm, because you're just trying to get it penetrated over a tule or into maybe a hole in the hydrilla or whatever you may be fishing. This would be rigged weedless, and you're dropping it down, letting it hit the bottom, shaking it a couple of times, and you don't necessarily need this worm to be sitting straight up, because it's dropping down. The worm's going to follow the bait down, so it's going to be floating. Once it hits the bottom, you're going to give it action, just like you were punching. Bam, 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 bam. Nothing. Pull it up, get it into the next little pocket or hole, or punch through whatever you're punching. So that's I believe they call that a Tokyo rig. The other one that I'm using is a Jinka rig, and they come set up just like this. This is one that you can buy, and I think they're 2 for $5. But you can make your own, and I'll give you, this is a homemade one here, by just putting an O-ring on it and a snap and putting on a drop shot weight. It's the same thing. You probably have everything that you need to make this rig. Not go out and buy this, but have everything in your box to make this rig. This is a great rig here too, because again, you can use anywhere from the larger TRD. You can use the Halo Grub or whatever the heck they're calling it. You can use a zinker on it. You can also put a bigger hook on and use this mag fatty. And this is where the Bubba situation comes in. This is getting to a bait now that as this drops through, and instead of throwing a T-rig worm, whether it's a robo worm or any of the popular worms out here, instead of throwing that T-rig worm, a cut tail or something like that, you can throw the TRD. This is going to go down, and no matter what hook you have on it, this mag fatty will float it up like this. So instead of being drug along the bottom like a T-rig, the weight will be pulled along the bottom, but this is going to have its tail sitting up like this. And if you're in these areas that are soft bottom and you have let's just say minimal vegetation on the bottom, where it's maybe only growing that far off the bottom, with this thing moving through that bottom vegetation, it only being maybe 2 to 6 inches high, this tail kind of sticks up, or the weight doesn't penetrate completely through. So you have this bait just kind of going over the top of them, and it's a big bait. What I've done with this is I put it on a medium bait caster, and I'm using a 40-pound braid with about 6 or 8 feet of 12 to 15-pound test mono, or if I'm in really clear water, I'll use fluoro, and make that big long cast out there. And if you get in the right situation, you could really work this bait all the way back to the boat, just like it was a jig. So these Jinka rigs are another really good option. And with that, give that stuff a try, and let me know how you do. Let me know if there's a hook that you find that is working better than the other hook, than any other hook. I'll give you one more little tip. One of the things that I've been doing now, this is a who makes this? Was a pocket rocket by Reaction Innovations. You're not seeing this on. This is Marabou, and I'm putting that Marabou on there. I'm also do that with the Z-Man rigs, and I call this a spotlight. Now Marabou comes in any color in the rainbow. This happens to be hot pink, but they come in chartreuse, red, any color you want. And I like this because I can see it, and if something comes up and all of a sudden that spotlight goes out, you better set the hook. The other advantage is nobody's throwing this out here. Nobody. This, you can see just in the wind how this is blowing around. Well, that's what it does underwater. With the Marabou on here, it gives you one more thing that may be a triggering factor for the fish. You never know. They see a ton of these, they don't see any of these. Let me show you how I'm doing this. Again, you can go to any place that sells Marabou. It comes in, a big bundle. It's very cheap. What I'm going to do here is I'll just take the Marabou plume. You can get these at craft stores. You can get them at fly shops. All over. It comes from a bird, so this is totally eco-friendly what I'm doing. But you're going to expose the stem, and what I have here, you can make it yourself out of a needle or whatever, but it's I think they call it a fly tying fit. It's got a little hook on here, so what I'm doing, I'm able to pull this hook and grab the stem of this. So what we do to make this a spotlight is you just take your needle or whatever you're using to pull it through, you're sticking it in the worm and coming out right in the area that you want of the butt of the worm or the head of the worm, wherever you're going to take it. And then you hook it in. Oops. You hook it in there. Well, let's try it again. hook it in, and you pull it into the worm. See, I'm just pulling that into the worm, and that's all you do. Now, I left this long. If you don't like it that long, again, you're just gonna cut it and cut it to whatever you want. You can just cut it just so you can see it if you don't want a whole lot of flash down there. But that's another thing that you can do, not only on the TRDs, but a lot of times I'll do it on a couple of worms, especially here in the spawn time of the year when I may be throwing a worm down there and I have to have something visual that I could see. So with that, guys, check it out. Let me know how you do. This is a technique in progress. I'm catching fish on it, and what I'm trying to do is advance this so that we have a big enough hook, a big enough bait, and enough weight to get down there, and a bait that is weedless enough to rig, to throw out on the Delta and be comfortable. If a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pound fish grabs that, we're going to be able to set the hook on him and catch him. So again, just my thoughts on it. I'm new to this Ned Rigs stuff. These are the things that I've been trying. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope all of you have got an idea or two to go out and, if you're Ned rigging, do something a little different, or if you haven't started Ned rigging out here, you've got some good ideas to start using. So thank you guys for watching the video. Please send me a reply saying, Steve, either I think you're full of BS, none of that's going to work, or hey, I've been doing this and exactly what you said, but I just tweak it here or there. I need that kind of information. If I get enough of that kind of information, I'm able to figure out something that's really going. I will do another Ned Rig program, and we'll talk about more specific ways that you guys have helped me out in particular rigs. And who knows, this thing could be the next punch rig. Who knows? They'll catch fish out here. They're fun to use. You can use them with spinning gear if you're going to go light. So that's another bonus. If you have somebody on the boat that is not good with a bait caster, they can, just like throwing a drop shot, this is another rig that they can throw out there and catch fish. So thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe and tell a friend. And if you see me out on the water, make sure you say hi. Make sure you keep sending me the reports. I'm doing the weekly report on the Delta, and you guys are really helping me out with that. I'm getting more and more reports, so thank you guys that are sending the reports. With that, hey, see you guys at the next video, and again, thanks for watching.